Hey, what's up 819S? Today I want to talk about kind of pet peeve of mine when it comes to motovloggers or people talking about motorcycles. And I'm going to use my CRF250L as an example because when I was researching and when I watch other people's videos, I hear this and it's a kind of common complaint or criticism of the bike that I completely disagree with. So what a lot of people say is that they wish that it were a 300. They wish it were a 300cc. And I hope some of the people who believe that will watch this video because I think they're slightly misguided. I think there's a few major reasons why it's not and probably will never be 300cc. The first one is rules and regulations, kind of like laws. When it comes to bikes in Japan, a 250cc bike is exempt from inspection. And for other countries, that's not that big of a deal. Like where I'm from in America, having to do inspection or not having to do inspection is not that big of a game changer. I don't think it would sway somebody into buying or not buying a vehicle based on that. It's really not that hard to pass inspection as long as you have the basic, the vehicle's up to basic safety standards. In Japan, it's a different beast. Inspection is really expensive and really, really, really strict. So I've talked to people who own bigger bikes. They put aftermarket exhaust or stuff like that on the bike, and in order to go through inspection they have to revert the bike back to a completely stock bike, go through inspection, and then put their aftermarket parts back on after they pass the inspection, and they have to do this every 2 years, and on top of that the whole process is really expensive. So if this bike were made a 300cc bike in Japan, the number of customers willing to buy it would decrease significantly. So I can hear some people saying, well, that doesn't impact me, I don't live in Japan. And I think the other thing that people don't think about when they make comments like that is that it's very hard for vehicle manufacturers to make various models. For example, if they made a CRF250L for Japan and a different one for America and a different one for Canada and a different one for, for Germany, a different one for every country, because they all have different emission standards and safety standards and things like that, the cost of manufacture, the cost of producing all of these various models would be astronomical, and the companies just couldn't profit. So what they have to do is dumb these bikes down to the lowest common denominator. What that means is some of the strictest regulations in other countries may apply to the bike so that they can make one bike or two bikes that can be sold throughout the whole world. So I think when people are saying they wish that it came with a 300cc engine, I think what those people are saying is they wish the bike had more horsepower and or more torque. And then there's a new problem that can be introduced when you start thinking about that. Horsepower and torque are easier to add to an engine than people think. You just have to be willing to spend the money. But they also come at a price. There's a reason why every car is not a super high performance, sports engine. And it's because usually the more performance an engine can produce, the lower the maintenance periods. So you take an engine like the CRF250L engine, the maintenance periods are so long in between oil changes and valve checks. And that's because they detuned the engine. If they put a CRF250R, the racing engine, in here, you would probably have to check your valves and, do oil changes every weekend, in which case no one would buy it. It would also almost, not quite, but almost double the horsepower and torque. So you'd have the engine that you wanted, but it comes at a cost. The other thing to consider too is fuel efficiency and fuel economy. If I bought a 250 that had the same fuel economy as a 500 or a 700cc bike, then there's no real point for me to buy a 250 anymore. Part of the reason people like 250s is because they're really, really good on gas. They really sip gasoline instead of gulp it, So I think what people are asking for is more power and more torque, and they don't always understand the implication of that. I think there's some things that can be done. Of course, when you're about to buy a new bike, when you're going to buy a new bike, you have to do your research. You have to decide, is the CRF the bike for me, or is the WR the bike for me? And there's a lot of aspects to consider, not only the engine. For example, the only thing that I would change on my CRF would be the suspension. And I think people who criticize suspension or gearing or other things, they're a little bit more practical or reasonable of requests. They don't really get under my skin the way that people saying they wish they had the big bore kit or the 300cc, version of the 250L. That doesn't really get under my skin the same way those comments do. Because it's reasonable and it's practical. And I think the issue there goes to money. So again, you have to think about why Honda designed the bike the way that they did. And I believe they did it because they wanted a very economical bike, the lowest price bike that they could possibly make, that would satisfy the biggest number of people, the most people, right? So if you look at what the CRF250L is, it's a really great beginner's bike. It has enough power to do some light off-roading and some really great trail riding. If you're a heavier guy, the suspension is really soft and really leaves a lot to be desired. But if you're a lighter guy, then the bike will probably perform really great for you. And I think that's something you have to keep in mind. If you go with the WR, you're going to spend $3,000 more for a brand new bike, and you're going to get the adjustable suspension, and you're going to get a little bit more horsepower, a little bit more torque, and you're going to get, all the things that you might criticize the CRF250L for. But remember, you're spending $3,000 more for it. A retail price. So if you're on a budget, that's the thing you really have to consider. If you want a WR, but you only have money for a CRF, the basic idea is to buy the CRF then the basic idea is to buy the CRF, and then as you save up some more money, or as you get more skilled as a rider, you start to do the upgrades. That's a big cat. And if you're really on such a tight budget, you really ought to do as much research as possible and dig as deep as you can into the bike that you're interested in buying. That orange house is weird. And the last thing I'll say then is, if you really want to see some changes made, I think you don't really have to make a video and put it on YouTube. I think a better thing to do would be to write letters to the manufacturers, especially if you bought a bike. If you were debating the CRF versus a WR, like a common issue that a lot of people debate, after you chose, you can write letters to the manufacturers respectively and tell them what you thought, what you bought, and why you bought it. And you may or may not see changes. If I wrote a letter to Honda and told them that I opted for a WR, the Yamaha WR, because the suspension is better, it may make Honda think maybe we should upgrade the suspension a little bit, because that's what people are asking for. And if enough people have similar complaints or similar criticisms, I think it would cause Honda to take more action. The other question is, are you willing to spend more money? So if they did produce a CRF that had a lot more horsepower, but you had to do maintenance a lot more often, are you willing to do the maintenance, and are you willing to spend a little more money for the better bike? Now, the way to upgrade the bikes is really what a lot of people don't want to get into, though, because you're talking about doing a muffler and header that can flow more air, an inbox that can flow more air, an intake that can flow more air, and then you want better cams, right? You want more aggressive cam, and then you want lighter valves and maybe stiffer valve springs, and you want to maybe port and polish the head. There's a lot of things you can do to make the bike put out a little bit more horsepower, than maybe even a stroker. You might want to get a little bit more compression. Then you're talking about using premium gasoline instead of regular, and you know, the cost just increases really quickly when you start going down that path. But anyways, I hope you liked the video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Ride safe.